Listen to that sound. Most people hear the rhythm of a trade, the heartbeat of progress, the music of a growing nation. But for Elias, it is the ticking of a life sentence. Every strike of the hammer is a counted moment he will never get back. A second stolen, a breath spent inside a place that does not forgive. In the late 1830s, the forge was not simply a workshop, it was an altar where iron was baptized in fire and turned into instruments of control. Here, raw metal lost its freedom long before any human ever did. Elias stands at the center of it, day after day, year after year. His body tells the story before his mouth ever could. Thin white scars line his arms like old rivers, carved there by sparks that landed too close. Thick raised keloids mark places where molten slag kissed skin and never let go. His shoulders are permanently bowed, not from age, but from the gravity of labor without end. The heat does not rest on the skin. It invades. It presses into the lungs, coats the throat, dries the eyes until blinking becomes painful. The air itself burns. 120 degrees, sometimes more. Breathing feels like swallowing sand. Sweat never cools. There is no relief, only saturation. He has not known a cool breeze in 15 years. Not truly. Even at night, the forge lives inside him, radiating through muscle and bone, refusing to let him forget where he belongs. Elias is a master craftsman, a man whose hands understand iron the way a poet understands words. Given another life, those hands might have raised cathedrals, shaped city gates, forged bells that called people to worship. Instead, they build suffering. On this plantation, they call him reliable, precise, essential. Among his own people, he is known by another name, the maker of sorrows. Every chain that bites into a runaway's ankle begins under his hammer. Every shackle that echoes in the night carries his signature. Every iron collar placed on a child's neck passed through his fire first. The overseers admire the smoothness of his work, the way the metal doesn't snag, the way it holds without tearing too fast. Elias knows why that matters. He knows exactly how iron behaves against flesh. He knows how skin swells, how blood darkens, how pain stretches time. He remembers filing down sharp edges, not to reduce cruelty, but to make sure the punishment lasted longer, to make sure no one bled out before the lesson was learned. Sometimes, as he works, he hears the punishment cage being dragged across the gravel outside. The sound reaches him even over the hammer, metal scraping stone, slow and deliberate. That cage was his design. He remembers measuring it, testing the bars, making sure no grown man could force them apart, making sure hope had nowhere to grip. The screams that follow do not come from his ears alone. They come from memory, from imagination, from the knowledge that he helped make them possible. His mind is a prison deeper than any cell on the plantation. Guilt follows him like a second shadow. It does not sleep. It does not fade. It sits on his chest when he lies down at night, heavier than the 20-pound sledgehammer he swings for 14 hours a day. His body is exhausted, but his thoughts never are. When Elias closes his eyes, he does not see escape. He sees faces, men who trusted him, boys who watched his hands with awe, thinking skill might one day protect them. women who turned away when they realized what he had been ordered to build next. He remembers his own family most of all, a wife whose voice has thinned in his memory, like smoke carried off by wind. Children whose faces blur at the edges, not because he loved them less, but because time has been ruthless. Sometimes he whispers their names into the furnace. He tells himself the fire will remember them if he can't, that the flames will carry them somewhere safer than his own mind can. There is a particular kind of madness that comes from being indispensable to your oppressor. The master knows Elias's value. He feeds him better than the field hands, gives him slightly longer rest, calls him the best boy in the county, speaks of him with pride to visiting guests. Each compliment burns worse than the forge. Because Elias understands the truth, he is being kept alive not as a man, but as a tool. A sharpened blade the system refuses to dull. And every day he continues, the blade cuts deeper into his own soul. By now, Elias knows he cannot endure forever. Something inside him has begun to rot, slow and quiet, like iron left too long in damp earth. The hopelessness is no longer sharp, it is suffocating, a thick black veil that presses down on every thought of tomorrow. Then he sees it, the great cage, the master's newest obsession, larger, stronger, meant to last generations. Elias understands immediately what it represents, not just punishment, but permanence. If he builds this the way he is ordered, no one will ever escape it, not in this lifetime, not in the next. He will become the architect of a permanent tomb. As the day fades, the air changes. It grows heavy, thick with the scent of ozone. The sky darkens, not gently, but with intent. Somewhere, far across the fields, a low rumble begins, deep, distant, alive. Thunder. To the master, it means crops must be secured. To the overseer, it is an inconvenience, but to Elias, it is something else entirely. It is cover. It is permission. It is the first sound in years that does not belong to them. For the first time in a decade, Elias does not feel only the hammer in his hand. He feels something colder, thinner, hidden against his skin. A file, small, forgettable, dangerous in ways no one has considered yet. The storm is coming. And for Elias, the storm does not sound like destruction. It sounds like patience. It sounds like time. It sounds, finally, like freedom. The morning after the storm does not bring relief. It never does. The air is thick with the smell of wet earth, iron, and ash. Rain has cooled the ground, but not the forge. The heat lingers, trapped inside stone and memory. Elias is already working when the sound reaches him, the sound that always arrives before suffering. Boots. Heavy, polished, deliberate. They strike the stone floor with a measured confidence, each step announcing ownership. Elias does not turn around. He never does. He knows who it is before the sound reaches his ears. Master Sterling does not enter rooms quietly. He believes power should be heard before it is seen. Sterling walks through the forge as if it belongs to him in the most intimate way. not just the walls or the tools, but the people inside it. His presence changes the air. The hammer slows, breath tightens, silence gathers itself around him. He stops near the anvil. His shadow stretches across it, long and distorted, swallowing the place where Elias works. To Sterling, Elias is not a man standing in front of him. He is part of the furnace, an extension of the fire, a living mechanism that turns raw iron into obedience. Sterling's eyes drift toward the far corner of the forge, where the great cage waits. It sits in shadow like a sleeping animal, jagged bars, thick joints, rust creeping along its seams. It has already broken men. Elias knows their faces. He helped put them inside. "It's not enough," Sterling says at last. His voice is calm, flat, devoid of effort. Cruelty spoken without anger is always the most dangerous kind. He talks about runaways, about rumors drifting in from neighboring counties, about men who dared to believe distance could undo ownership. His paranoia masquerades as order. To Sterling, order is not peace, it is stillness, absolute, enforced stillness. He wants more iron. Strip the old bars, replace them with double-thick steel, reinforce the joints, weld them clean, seamless, no gaps, no mercy, not even space for air to feel hopeful. He describes the cage the way a craftsman describes a prized object. The height, low enough to force a man to bow. The width, narrow enough to prevent turning. A structure designed not just to contain the body, but to erase the mind. This cage, Sterling says, will be the end of dreams, the final destination for anyone who whispers about the North. As the words settle, Elias feels bile rise in his throat. He has built suffering before, but this is different. This is permanence. This is legacy. Sterling is not asking for a tool of punishment. He is commissioning a monument to fear. And Elias is being asked to sign it with his hands. As Sterling speaks, Elias listens, but not the way he used to. Something inside him has shifted. He watches the master's face closely now. The certainty, the arrogance, the unshakable belief that iron, once forged, is obedient forever. Sterling does not understand metal the way Elias does. Iron remembers. It remembers stress, pressure, weakness hidden beneath polish. And Sterling's greatest flaw reveals itself in that moment, not cruelty, not paranoia, but faith. Absolute faith in the blacksmith's skill. Faith that the best craftsman will always build the strongest cage. That faith becomes Elias's opening. The plan does not arrive with thunder or revelation. It forms quietly, like a crack spreading through cooling steel. Slow, invisible, certain. Elias lowers his head. Sterling thinks it is submission, another man bending under command. But Elias bows only to hide his eyes, to hide the sharpened clarity settling behind them. "I'll make it so no man can ever break it," Elias says. His voice is rough, scraped raw by years of coal dust and silence. The words cut both ways, though Sterling hears only one side. The master smiles, satisfied, reassured that the system still works exactly as intended. He leaves the forge the way he entered, boots echoing, power intact, conscience untouched. Elias is alone again. Before him lies a pile of raw iron, heavy, unforgiving, a deadline that would break most men. But Elias does not see a cage anymore. He sees a battlefield measured in inches, in storms, in patience. He lifts upward through the narrow opening where light fights its way in. The sky is still swollen with rain. The season is changing. Elias knows the sound of storms the way other men know prayer. For every bar he raises, there will be a moment to undo it. For every weld, a chance to weaken what appears perfect. For every command obeyed, a lie planted inside the iron. He lifts the hammer. The sound is the same as yesterday. The forge burns the same. The world sees nothing different, but the intent has changed. Elias is no longer building a cage. He is building a trap for the system that enslaved him. The long game has begun. The air inside the forge changes before the rain ever falls. It grows heavy, pressurized, the kind of stillness that feels like a hand closing over a mouth. Even the fire behaves differently, less wild, more tense, as if it knows something is coming. Elias feels it in his bones long before he sees it in the sky. He stops working. The raw iron Master Sterling delivered sits untouched beside him. It can wait. Iron has waited centuries. Elias turns instead toward the small barred window cut into the stone wall. It is the only place in the forge where the world beyond still announces itself. He knows this land the way sailors know the sea. He knows the signs. The birds go quiet first, then the insects. Cicadas that screamed without rest all morning suddenly vanish into silence. Even the wind seems to hold its breath. Elias counts, not seconds, patterns. A jagged white line splits the sky in the distance, violent and sudden. A moment later the growl arrives, low, rolling, alive. Thunder that does not crash but vibrates. The kind that rattles soot loose from rafters and makes iron hum. The first storm of the season has arrived. Across the plantation people scatter. Overseers shout. Field hands run for cover. Doors slam. Windows shutter. Storms bring chaos, and chaos makes masters nervous. But Elias moves. He crosses the forge with a speed no one has ever seen him before. Purpose sharpens him. Fear focuses him. He stops at the great cage, standing before it not as a servant, but as a surgeon approaching an incision. He kneels. Beneath the anvil, hidden inside a hollowed cavity only he knows exists, he reaches in and pulls out a small object wrapped in oil-stained cloth. A file, triangular, narrow, worn smooth from age and careful use. He stole it months ago from a shipment meant for repairs, hid it, risked death every day simply by keeping it alive. This is not a tool. It is a sentence. It is 20 years of waiting condensed into steel. Elias places his hand against the first vertical bar of the cage, the very one he reinforced yesterday. It is cold, solid, perfect, just as Sterling demanded. He does not rush. He waits.
Another flash. Another count. 1, 2, 3. The sky tears itself open. Thunder detonates across the fields, massive and consuming. In that single violent breath of sound, Elias moves. The file bites the iron. A shrill scream erupts, metal scraping metal, sharp enough to cut through thought itself. Screech! But the sound never leaves the forge. It is swallowed whole by the storm, devoured by thunder that does not care about human secrets. Elias stops instantly when the roar fades, freezing in place, heart slamming against his ribs like it is trying to escape before he can. Silence returns. He waits again. This is how it begins. Elias understands immediately that this cannot be rushed. One mistake will end him. If he files too deep, the bar will vibrate. If it vibrates, it will sing, and if it sings, the overseer will hear it. If he files when the air is quiet, the sound will betray him before his hands ever do. So he adopts. He becomes patient in a way pain has already taught him. He times his breathing to the clouds. He watches the sky like a predator watches prey. When thunder rolls, his arm moves. When it fades, he becomes stone. Stroke, stop. Stroke, stop. He is not trying to cut through the bar. That would be foolish, impossible. He is doing something far more dangerous. He is creating weakness, a microscopic notch at the base where the bar meets the floor, the place where stress hides, where weight transfers, where failure begins long before it is visible. Each stroke is measured, calculated, controlled. Elias has spent his life learning how to make iron unbreakable. Now, for the first time, he applies that same mastery in reverse. He is learning exactly how iron fails. Rain pounds the roof. Thunder rolls again and again, and each time Elias moves with it, synchronized, invisible. To anyone outside, the storm is chaos. To Elias, it is rhythm. By the time the sky begins to lighten, by the time thunder grows tired and the rain softens into a lazy drizzle, Elias steps back. He has accomplished almost nothing. The groove is no deeper than a fingernail, barely a scar. To the naked eye, the iron looks untouched, perfect, stronger than ever. Sterling would admire it. Elias knows better. He kneels once more and mixes soot with tallow between his fingers, packing the dark paste carefully into the tiny wound he has made. He smooths it, blends it, erases all evidence. The iron looks whole again. The file returns to its hiding place. Elias wipes sweat from his face, his hands trembling, not with fear, but with something colder, something steadier, control. The storm passes, the forge settles, the world returns to its rules. But the master's cage is now weaker than it was an hour ago. The change cannot be measured in inches or even millimeters. It exists only in intention, in patience, in time. And for the first time in his life, Elias knows something no one else does. The iron no longer belongs to them. The true genius of Elias's plan does not live in the filing. It lives in what comes after. Storms are rare. Thunder is generous but brief. What fills the rest of the year is scrutiny. Endless, suffocating scrutiny.
Elias understands this better than anyone. Over the next 20 years, the great cage will be inspected hundreds of times by men whose entire purpose is to find weakness. Men who believe their authority depends on discovering flaws before anyone else can exploit them. To survive that long, the damage cannot merely be small. It must be invisible. The morning after his first act of sabotage becomes the most dangerous moment of his life. Not the storm, not the filing, the morning. Daylight exposes what darkness forgives. Elias wakes with his heart already cold, his thoughts moving faster than his body. He approaches the cage the way a condemned man approaches a judge. He does not look at the bars as himself. He forces himself to see them through the eyes of his enemy. He bends, squints, tilts his head. He searches for any betrayal of light, any glint of fresh silver, any edge too sharp, any place where the iron looks younger than it should. He imagines in overseers' suspicion the way their gaze lingers just a moment too long on anything unfamiliar. He knows the smallest mistake will not earn questions, it will earn an example. So Elias erases himself. He develops a solution as deliberate as the crime itself. From the forge floor, he gathers the fine iron filings, the dust left behind by every act of creation. The same powder that coats his skin, fills his lungs, and darkens his sweat. He mixes it with rendered animal tallow, thick and greasy, pulled from scraps no one counts. Then he adds soot, heavy, black, ancient, scraped from the very bottom of the furnace where fire leaves its memory. This mixture is not improvised, it is engineered. The color matches aged iron perfectly. The texture absorbs light instead of reflecting it. The smell blends into the forge's constant stench of heat and ash. Elias works slowly, packing the paste into the microscopic groove he created, pressing it in with his thumb until the wound disappears beneath a false skin. He buffs the surface with rough leather, steady and methodical, until the patched area feels no different than the rest of the bar. Not smoother, not rougher, just ordinary. Under lantern light it passes, under inspection it survives, but sight is only one test. Elias knows the overseers trust their ears more than their eyes. He has watched them strike bars with heavy wooden batons, listening for betrayal. A hollow sound, a dull note, a rattle that whispers weakness. Iron speaks when it is struck, and Elias has learned its language fluently. He spends weeks experimenting, removing almost nothing, then listening again, removing slightly more, then listening again. He studies resonance the way priests study scripture, how sound travels through metal, how stress hides beneath strength, how much material can vanish before the tone changes. This is no longer just rebellion. It is applied physics under threat of death. He learns to leave the bars strong enough to sing the right note when struck head-on, strong enough to survive routine testing, but fragile in a way no overseer understands, vulnerable to lateral force, to panic, to the sudden violence of a man who has waited too long for air. The bars will not fail slowly, they will fail suddenly, and that is what makes them dangerous. The psychological cost of this phase is immense. Every morning, Elias must undo himself. Every act of sabotage must be buried beneath perfection. He is forced to make the cage look more terrifying, more flawless, more permanent with each passing month. He becomes his own jailer. He lives in a constant state of doublethink, seeing the cage as two things at once, a monument to the master's ego and a doorway he is quietly carving open for his soul. He must take pride in work designed to destroy him, knowing that his survival depends on how convincing that pride appears. When he finishes buffing the first section of bars, Elias steps back and allows himself only one truth. Invisibility is his armor. The great cage remains a masterpiece of iron, but now, hidden beneath its flawless surface, it is also a masterpiece of lies. And lies, when maintained long enough, can bring empires down. Time on the plantation does not move forward. It circles. It moves through seasons, not hours, through harvests, not calendars, through suffering so repetitive that days lose their names. Elias learns this early. The forge becomes his universe, unchanging, unyielding, eternal. The first year passes almost unnoticed. The second drags. By the fifth, time no longer feels like something that can be counted. It feels like something that presses down. The soot has worked its way into the deepest lines of Elias's face, settling there permanently, like history etched into stone. His hands are thicker now, slower. His hair, once as black as the coal he feeds the furnace, has begun to betray him. Thin streaks of gray appear at his temples, silver threads woven into a life spent waiting. Waiting is the hardest skill he learns. He learns to live inside what he comes to call the long game, a place where urgency is deadly, and impatience is a confession. He watches the world change only through the small square of his window. Spring arrives in shades of green that feel almost cruel. Summer burns the fields gold, the heat outside competing with the inferno he already lives in. And through it all, the great cage grows. More bars, more welds, more reinforcements ordered by a master who believes fear must always be louder than hope. Each addition is another opportunity, another burden, another storm waited for. As the years stretch on, Sterling changes too. Wealth settles into him like fat. His confidence grows heavy, bloated by the absence of resistance. He walks differently now, slower, less cautious. The cage has become a symbol of his authority, proof that nothing on this land moves without his permission. To Sterling, Elias has become part of the scenery, a fixture, as reliable as the anvil, as predictable as fire. That is the danger of time. It dulls suspicion. It convinces the powerful that what has always obeyed will always obey. Sterling no longer watches Elias closely. He walks past the cage and runs his gloved hand along the bars. Bars Elias has spent years quietly dismantling from the inside. Sterling feels only cold, polished strength. He nods, satisfied, proud of what he believes he owns. He never notices the way Elias watches the sky. He never wonders why storms seem to matter more to the blacksmith than sunshine. By now, the physical toll is undeniable. Elias's joints ache constantly, especially during the rainy season, the very season when he must be at his most alert. His fingers stiffen in the cold. His shoulders burn even when he rests. His eyesight begins to betray him, strained by the furnace's glare and the impossibly fine precision his secret work demands. There are nights when thunder rolls and Elias does not move. His body begs him to stay still, to lie down, to surrender to exhaustion. He stands frozen, the iron heavy in his hand, wondering if this is the night he lets the storm pass without him. Then he looks at the cage. He thinks of the years already buried inside it, of grooves no one knows exist, of progress measured in dust and patience. If he stops now, the iron wins. If he stops now, 5 years collapse into nothing. So he stands. He grips the file with hands that shake not from fear but from fatigue. He lifts his eyes to the sky and waits again for permission from the sky. By the 10th year, the great cage appears complete. It stands massive and flawless, double thick bars, seamless welds, a monument to permanence, to permanency. To everyone else on the plantation, it is proof that escape is a fantasy best forgotten. But Elias sees something else. He sees a map. Every notch, every weakness, every place where iron has been persuaded to lie. He knows the cage the way a man knows his own scars, not by sight, but by memory, by feel, by pain. A decade of storms has changed him. He speaks less now, moves slower, every action deliberate. He has been shaped by fire and waiting, hardened and tempered in equal measure. Elias has become like the iron he works with, stronger not because it is untouched, but because it has survived heat without breaking. As he wipes soot from his brow, he glances once more at the sky. The 10th year arrives on a wave of heat so brutal it turns the forge into a sealed furnace. The air itself feels thick, unmoving, as if even breath must be earned. Sweat pours from Elias before the fire is even lit, stinging his eyes, soaking into the grooves of his hands. But the heat is familiar. He has learned how to survive heat. What he has not learned to survive is fear. It comes suddenly, on a Tuesday afternoon, with no warning at all. The heavy wooden doors of the forge swing open hard enough to rattle the walls. Elias does not hear Master Sterling's boots. Instead, he sees a stranger framed in the doorway, tall, still, watching. This is Silas, the new head overseer, a former soldier, a man whose posture has never softened back into civilian life. His eyes are pale and sharp, like chipped flint, and in his hand he carries a thick iron rod, scarred from use. Silas does not greet Elias. He does not ask questions. He steps inside with the quiet authority of someone who believes every structure, every system, every man will eventually reveal its weakness. His eyes move past Elias almost immediately. They lock onto the great cage. Elias remains where he stands, frozen beside the anvil, hammer hanging heavy in his grip. He knows better than to move. Silas circles the cage slowly, like a man studying a battlefield. This is not a performance inspection meant to be seen. This is intimate, private, dangerous. The overseer's fingers reach out, not to strike, but to feel. Calloused fingertips slide along the lower bars, exactly where Elias has spent 10 years stealing iron 1 grain at a time. Elias's chest tightens. His breathing becomes shallow, silent. Each inch Silas's hand travels feels like a blade drawn across Elias's spine. Then Silas stops. His thumb rests on a bar Elias worked on the night before. The paste of soot and tallow is still fresh, still soft beneath the skin. If Silas presses harder, if he rubs, if he scrapes, Elias imagines the flash of exposed silver, imagines the shout, the whip, the rope. He tastes iron in his mouth, unsure if it is blood or memory. Time stretches thin. The forge seems to hold its breath. Silas frowns. He steps back, lifts the iron rod, and strikes the cage. Clang. The sound is sharp, clean, too clean. Silas moves to the next bar. Clang. Another, and another. Each blow sends a vibration through the cage, through the floor, through Elias's bones. He feels the strikes in his wrists, his elbows, his shoulders, places already worn hollow by years of labor. Silas is not listening for volume. He is listening for weakness, for the subtle dishonesty and metal that has been pushed too far. Then the rod strikes that bar, the sabotaged one. The sound rings out, clear, strong, obedient, exactly as Elias calculated. Silas pauses anyway. His eyes narrow. He strikes again, harder. The bar hums. A faint tremor shivers through it. Elias's vision blurs, not from heat, but from the certainty that this is how it ends. Something flakes loose. A speck of dark soot drifts down and lands on the packed dirt floor. Silas's gaze drops. The forge becomes unbearably silent. Elias shifts his grip on the hammer. For the first time in 10 years, he allows himself to imagine violence, not as rebellion, but as interruption. If Silas bends down, if he reaches for the bar, Elias knows the distance, knows the weight of the hammer, knows exactly where a skull gives way. Then a voice cuts through the silence from outside. Master Sterling, loud, irritated, calling for Silas over a delayed shipment of new arrivals. The overseer straightens slowly. He stares at the floor one last time, then lifts his eyes to Elias. The look is not accusation. It is promise. You're a good smith, but iron always tells its secrets. Eventually. He turns and leaves. The doors close. The forge exhales. Elias's knees give way, and he leans hard against the anvil, lungs burning as air finally floods back into his body. His hands shake uncontrollably. He looks at the bar where Silas struck and sees it, a thin, pale scratch cutting through years of camouflage. A warning. Master Sterling may see Elias as part of the landscape, a tool, a fixture, but Silas listens to metal. And now the clock is no longer measured in seasons or storms. It is measured in how long before the iron speaks. The forge never truly recovers from Silas's inspection. Even on cooler mornings, a chill seems to cling to the walls, as if fear itself has soaked into the brick. Elias feels it in his hands first. A faint tremor, almost polite in its arrival, settles into his fingers just after dawn. It disappears once the hammer starts moving, but the message is clear. Time has begun to notice him. Master Sterling notices too. The work is still flawless, still strong, but it is slower. And so the master makes a decision that feels to Elias like a blade slipped quietly between his ribs. An apprentice is sent to the forge. A boy named Joshua, barely 19, thin, quick-eyed. His face still carries the raw openness of someone who has not yet learned what iron costs. To Sterling, the boy is an efficiency measure. To Elias, he is a living fracture in the wall he has built around his secret. The long game has survived storms, overseers, and decades of silence. It has never survived a witness. For months, Elias treats the boy as if he were part of the furniture. He speaks only when necessary, assigns only the most punishing, mindless labor. Coal hauling, ash sweeping, bellows pumping until Joshua's shoulders ache and his hands blister. Elias watches him constantly, not with kindness, but with suspicion. He listens for loose words, watches for wandering eyes. But Joshua does not complain. He does not rush. He does not look away. Instead, he watches Elias work with a focus that feels unsettlingly familiar. Not curiosity, recognition. One evening, as the sky darkens into bruised purples and the first low roll of thunder moves through the rafters, Elias notices the boy has stopped working. Joshua is staring at the great cage, not with fear, with calculation. He looks from the bars to Elias's hands, then back again. Their eyes meet. No words are exchanged, none are needed. Something passes between them, an understanding too dangerous to name. The air in the forge tightens, thinner than the heat, heavier than the smoke. Elias knows the choice cannot be delayed. He can hide the work and risk discovery, or he can share it and risk betrayal. Either way, the next 10 years balance on the edge of a file. The storm outside breaks open, rain hammering the roof like lashes. Thunder rolls close enough to shake dust from the beams. Elias reaches for the tool he has kept hidden longer than any scar on his body. Joshua sees it. The triangular file glints briefly in the firelight. Elias does not explain. He does not warn. He simply holds it out, points to the base of the bar, and waits. The thunder cracks overhead loud enough to swallow sound itself. Joshua steps forward. He does not flinch. He does not speak. His body positions itself between Elias and the open doorway, his shadow blocking the light, his shadow falling over the bar like a veil. In that moment, the decision is sealed, not by words, but by instinct. The long game now has a second heartbeat. The forge changes shape after that. What was once a solitary endurance becomes a language of whispers and glances. Joshua becomes the watchman. His younger ears catch the rhythm of approaching boots before Elias can. His eyes notice shifts in the yard, pauses in conversation, doors opening where they He learns quickly. The soot paste, the tallow layers, the art of making damage look like age. His fingers are steadier than Elias's now, better suited for the delicate theft of metal hidden beneath filth and grease. But with partnership comes weight. Every risk now carries 2 lives. Elias feels it settle into his chest, heavier than any chain. He begins to teach Joshua more than craft. He teaches him endurance. He tells him the iron remembers every strike, every weakness, every patient insult. He tells him that strength is loud, but patience is permanent. The forge is no longer just a prison. It has become a school, and the master's best boy is learning how to walk toward a door that has not yet been made, but already exists in the mind of the iron. By the 15th year, the work is no longer measured in metal removed or storms endured. It has become an education in belief. Elias understands now that iron's greatest strength is not its density, but the certainty men place in it. People obey the cage long before they ever touch it. He begins to study the bars the way a general studies an enemy, not for their hardness, but for their habits. He tells Joshua that iron has a mind. Every bar vibrates at its own frequency. Every weld carries the memory of heat, pressure, and haste. He teaches the boy to become like the furnace itself, burning fierce and alive inside, while remaining cold, dull, and unremarkable on the surface. This is the age of the internal forge. Elias spends long hours simply standing before the great cage, no longer seeing it as a confinement. He is no longer studying what exists. He is rehearsing the absence that will one day replace it. The weight of a 20-year lie begins to change him in ways no overseer can name. Elias moves through the plantation like a shadow that belongs there, but is never addressed. He speaks rarely, and when he does, his words sound like fragments, half-finished thoughts that make men uneasy. The overseers see the gray in his hair, the stiffness in his gait, and mistake restraint for surrender. They think the fire has consumed him. They do not understand that he has mastered it. Elias lives inside a dual reality. To Master Sterling, the great cage is a completed triumph, a monument to control, permanence, and ownership. To Elias, it is already ruined, a hollow form waiting only for the correct moment to admit the truth. That private knowledge becomes his oxygen. Without it, his spirit would have turned brittle long ago. He tells Joshua that iron has a mind. Every bar vibrates at its own frequency. Every weld carries the memory of heat, pressure, and haste. He teaches the boy to become like the furnace itself, burning fierce and alive inside, while remaining cold, dull, and unremarkable on the surface. This is the age of the internal forge. Elias spends long hours simply standing before the great cage, no longer seeing it as confinement. He is no longer studying what exists. He is rehearsing the absence that will one day replace it. The weight of a 20-year lie begins to change him in ways no overseer can name. Elias moves through the plantation like a shadow that belongs there but is never addressed. He speaks rarely, and when he does, his words sound like fragments, half-finished thoughts that make men uneasy. The overseers see the gray in his hair, the stiffness in his gait, and mistake restraint for surrender. They think the fire has consumed him. They do not understand that he has mastered it. Elias lives inside a dual reality. To Master Sterling, the great cage is a completed triumph, a monument to control, permanence, and ownership. To Elias, it is already ruined. A hollow form,
waiting only for the correct moment to admit the truth. That private knowledge becomes his oxygen. Without it, his spirit would have turned brittle long ago.
It is during this period that Elias introduces Joshua to the idea of the snap. He explains that iron is proud, and pride makes it predictable. Struck the way it expects, straight, vertical, obedient, it will endure for generations. But force it sideways into the tiny insult carved patiently at its base, and the metal will betray itself in an instant. There is no warning, no gradual bend, only release. They are not weakening the cage to watch it fail slowly. They are preparing it for a single decisive collapse. The lesson extends beyond the forge. Elias teaches Joshua to endure humiliation without reaction, punishment without protest. Their lives are being aligned, their internal grains set toward a moment that no one else can see. They are not resisting the master's world head-on. They are becoming the error in its design. Master Sterling, now heavier and slower with age, begins to parade visitors through the forge. He boasts about the great cage, about how it took nearly 2 decades to perfect, how no man could ever break it. Elias stands in the shadows, silent and bowed, as wealthy men run their fingers over the bars with careless confidence. None of them hear what he hears. The faint memory of weakness beneath the surface, the quiet countdown hidden under soot and grease. Elias feels a cold, almost indulgent amusement. These men believe iron is what keeps them safe. They do not realize they are trusting their power, their property, perhaps even their lives, to a structure held together by habit, belief, and a paste made from waste. The psychology has shifted. The master is now imprisoned by his certainty, and the blacksmith, long before the iron breaks, is already free. In the 18th year, the forge is ruptured by a single silent catastrophe. Joshua, clearing the soot from beneath the anvil ahead of a surprise inspection, freezes. The hollowed stone where the triangular file has slept for nearly 2 decades is bare, empty. The absence is louder than any alarm. A cold paralysis spreads through Elias, slow and absolute. That tool is not just steel, it is the proof of everything. If it has been found, then every storm night, every microscopic weakness, every lie layered in soot is already a confession waiting to be spoken aloud. They work through the day inside a pressure that never releases. Elias forces his hands to remember their rhythm, though his mind is splintering with possibilities. Guards pass the open door. Overseers linger longer than usual. When Silas's gaze settles on the great cage, Elias feels pain that hasn't arrived yet, a punishment rehearsed in the body before it ever happens. They cannot search. They cannot whisper. They cannot betray panic. Each strike of the hammer becomes a count, not forward, down. Did Elias leave it exposed during the last storm? Did a servant mistake it for scrap? Or is this worse? Has Silas already found it and is now waiting, patient and cruel, for the right moment to close the trap? The pressure peaks when Master Sterling enters the forge with a leather pouch in his hand. He walks straight toward Elias. No anger, no urgency, just intention. Time compresses. Elias's grip tightens around the iron poker near the furnace. If this ends here, it will not end quietly. Sterling reaches into the pouch and produces not an accusation, but a request. Intricate brass hinges to be fitted to the great cage by morning. As he speaks, Elias's eyes drift downward, and the world tilts. Hanging from Sterling's belt, hooked casually beside his keys, is the triangular file. The master has been carrying it openly, mistaking it for an ordinary tool, using it even now to smooth the rim of his tobacco pipe. The instrument of collapse has been hiding in the light. To reclaim it, there will be no storm to cover the sound, only timing, nerve, and trust. As Elias begins fitting the hinges, Joshua stumbles, a deliberate mistake. Coal spills across the floor in a violent crash. Sterling spins, shouting. In that single chaotic breath, Elias moves. His hand slides from hinge to belt, from belt to sleeve. The motion is small, invisible, practiced by 18 years of restraint. The file disappears. Sterling never notices the weight leave his belt. The forge exhales. When the doors finally close, Elias feels the tremor in his hands for the first time in years. He understands now what nearly destroyed them. Not iron, not oversight, but the terrifying fragility of a 20-year plan balanced on a single piece of steel. As the 18th year bleeds into the 19th, the forge begins to change its weight. The labor is still brutal, but it is no longer the heaviest thing Elias carries. That burden now lives in the space between each hammer strike. The great cage stands nearly complete, its door hanging straight and true, and every time Elias looks at it, the past steps forward uninvited. He sees Martha's face, not as it was at the end, but as it was before fear lived there. He hears the wagon wheels again, grinding over gravel, that dull, merciless rhythm that once dragged his wife and 2 sons toward the Charleston auction block. The sound merges with the hammer in his hand. He understands now that he was never just shaping iron. He was trying to grind down the guilt of standing still while his entire life was loaded onto a cart and taken away. This becomes the era of the emotional forge. On nights when the storms do not come, when the sky offers no thunder to hide behind, Elias speaks. He tells Joshua about the way Martha hummed while hanging the wash, low and steady, like she was afraid to wake the world. He describes how his youngest son used to mimic the bellows, puffing out his cheeks until they laughed. He shares details he has guarded for 20 years, not because they are weak, but because they are sharp. He confesses something he has never said aloud. For the first decade, the work was fueled by hatred, pure, burning, and simple. He wanted to break the cage because it belonged to the master. But hatred burns fast. What replaced it was quieter, heavier, and harder to carry. Love, a love sharpened by loss, a vow that no other father would ever have to hear iron close around his own blood. Elias is not trying to become a hero. He is trying to repair a soul that shattered the day he did nothing. Sterling twists the knife without knowing it. One afternoon, he brings his grandson into the forge, a small boy with clean hands and curious eyes. He lifts the child so he can touch the bars of the great cage, laughing as if he is showing him a prize horse. He calls it the family legacy, protection, order. Elias watches from the shadows, his hands shaking so violently he hides them in the folds of his apron. The contrast is unbearable. Sterling's future is built from the wreckage of Elias's past. For a single dangerous moment, the plan nearly dies. Elias imagines lifting the sledgehammer and ending everything. The cage, the waiting, himself. A clean fracture, a loud truth. It is Joshua who stops time. The boy steps into Sterling's line of sight, asking an innocent question about airflow and smoke. The moment passes. The child leaves. The iron exhales. Later, when the iron has cooled and the shadows lengthen, Joshua places a hand on Elias's shoulder. It is the first unspoken permission between them. They are gone, he says softly, but we are still here, and the iron remembers. Elias looks at the great cage again, and it changes shape. It is no longer just a prison. It is a ledger. Every notch a name. Every hidden weakness a prayer. He lifts the triangular file, and his hands are steady. The grief is no longer a weight pulling him down. It has become a blade. He waits for the next thunderclap, not for himself, but for the ghosts who can no longer raise their voices. The year is 1857. 20 years have soaked into the forge, into the stone, into the soot, into Elias's bones. The great cage now dominates the space like a finished nightmare. Master Sterling presents it as the ultimate achievement of his estate, a monument to permanence. To any eye trained in power, the bars are thick, black, unquestionable. But beneath the surface, the cage is already dead. Elias and Joshua have entered the final, most dangerous stage. There will be no more obvious filing, no visible sabotage. Now they are thinning the iron to its last breath, shaving the base of the primary exit bars until only a shell remains, 1/16 of an inch, no more, no less. At this thickness, the metal still stands. At this thickness, it is already betrayed. The work requires a precision that borders on madness. Too much pressure, and the bar will sag under its own weight, a flaw that will be noticed instantly. Too little, and the iron will survive forever. Elias works as if he is handling glass instead of steel. His hammer is gone. Now there is only the file, the breath, the fingertips. He presses his fingers against the bar, feeling vibration rather than resistance. He listens not for sound, but for response. The iron speaks in temperature, in tremors, in fatigue. Elias no longer forces it. He whispers to it. He asks it to endure just a little longer, to pretend, to wait. Camouflage at this stage must be flawless. The thinning has altered the bar's voice. Its ring has softened, lost authority. To mask this, Elias and Joshua create their most advanced deception yet. A layered compound of iron dust, pine resin, and a river clay chosen for its acoustic density. They apply it in patient stages, allowing each layer to cure before adding the next. They buff the surface with sheep's wool until the bars glow with the dull honesty of solid iron. The illusion is so complete that even Elias must pause, counting bars in his head, reminding himself which ones are shells and which ones still carry real weight. The lie has become indistinguishable from truth. That is the most dangerous kind. The psychological tension becomes unbearable. The cage is declared finished. Inspections grow frequent, but now they are celebratory. Sterling brings guests. He encourages them to test the door, to rattle the bars, to lean into them with laughter and confidence. They praise Elias as loyal, as brilliant, as harmless. Every touch steals breath from Elias's chest. Every shove risks 20 years of silence. He watches as the full arrogance of the system presses its weight against his secret. The bars flex, just enough to feel alive. The filler holds, the iron does not fail. But Elias knows what no one else can hear. The metal is screaming. It is hollow. It is exhausted. It is no longer strong, only obedient, waiting for a single precise moment when force will come from the wrong direction, at the wrong angle, with the wrong expectation, waiting for permission. September 1857. The sky arrives wrong.
It is not just rain. It is not just wind. It is a great Atlantic hurricane, dragging the ocean itself toward the coast. The light turns a sick, bruised yellow, and the air feels pressurized, like the world is holding its breath. Elias doesn't need instruments to know what this is. His body recognizes it. The same instinct that taught him how iron fails tells him the long game has reached its final hour. The wind begins as a low whistle through the rafters, then swells into something predatory. By midday, it drowns out the plantation bells entirely. Master Sterling and the overseers panic. They board the great house. They secure the horses. They argue over windows and roofs. For the first time in 20 years, the forge disappears from the master's thoughts. Inside, the world becomes noise. Rain slams the stone walls so hard it forces its way through the mortar, turning the soot underfoot into black slurry. Water runs in thin rivers across the floor. The great cage stands in the center of it all, dark and massive, waiting. Elias and Joshua face it in silence. There are no instructions left to give. The hurricane is so loud they could scream and never be heard. This is no longer a window of sound. It is total acoustic erasure. The sky has drawn a curtain of chaos over the estate. Elias reaches for the sledgehammer. The same tool he once used to build the cage now feels different in his hands. Not heavier, finished. The forge groans as the wind batters it from all sides. The furnace, long extinguished, pulls a cold draft through its throat, whistling like something dying. Elias looks at Joshua and gives a single nod. He does not aim for the lock. He never planned to. He steps to the base of the primary exit bars, the ones thinned to a shell no thicker than a coin. He plants his feet, raises the hammer. This is not brute force. It is precision. He does not strike with the grain. He swings sideways, applying the one force iron is never prepared to accept. The hammer moves in a wide, final arc. The sound is wrong. It is not the deep clang of forged iron, but a sharp, crystalline crack, clean and violent. Even through the hurricane, it is unmistakable. The first bar does not bend. It explodes. The microscopic notches carved across 1,000 storms become perfect fault lines. The second bar snaps, then the third. The cage fails exactly as Elias predicted, not slowly, not mercifully, but at all once. The tallow and soot filler bursts into the air, black dust revealing the silver-white truth beneath. A gap opens, wide enough. Elias lets the hammer fall. His hands shake, not from weakness, but from the sudden absence of a weight he has carried since 1837. 20 years of waiting collapse into a single violent second. The great cage is broken. The storm is at its peak, and for the first time in his life, Elias is standing in front of an opening that leads somewhere the master cannot follow. The sound of the final bar snapping is a revelation, a high-pitched metallic scream that is instantly swallowed by the hurricane's fury. For 20 years, Elias has lived for this snap, the singular, violent moment when the molecular structure of the master's pride finally surrendered to the blacksmith's patience. He stands in the center of the forge, his chest heaving, looking at the jagged gap in the great cage. It is no longer a monument of security. It is a broken toy, its secret weaknesses finally exposed to the rain-soaked air. The expected force of the hammer has met the long game of the file, and the result is a doorway that Master Sterling never believed possible. Joshua is already at the forge doors, his eyes wide with the realization that the world outside is no longer just a place they watch through a barred window. They don't take tools, and they don't take memories. They take only the strength they have forged in this room for 2 decades. Elias casts one final look at the anvil, the silent witness to every microscopic notch and every tear he shed for the family he couldn't save. He realizes that he isn't just leaving a shop, he is leaving the maker of sorrows behind in the black slurry of the soot-stained floor.
They step out into the heart of the storm. The wind is a physical wall, but to men who have spent 20 years pushing against iron, the wind feels like a silk curtain. The plantation is in total disarray. The overseers are huddled in their cabins, and the master is trapped in his great house, terrified of the very nature Elias has partnered with for a lifetime. The rain washes the soot from Elias's skin for the first time in years, revealing the deep, honest scars of a man who has outlasted his oppressor. They move toward the edge of the woods, the hurricane providing a perfect curtain of chaos that masks their tracks and their direction. Elias feels a sudden, sharp lightness in his limbs. The weight of the 20-pound sledgehammer has finally been lifted from his soul. As the forge disappears into the gray sheets of rain, he knows that the masterpiece he leaves behind isn't the cage itself, but the empty space where the bars used to be. The snap wasn't just the breaking of iron, it was the breaking of a 2-decade-long silence and the first breath of a life that truly belongs to him. The morning after the hurricane, the plantation wakes to a world of fallen timber and flooded fields. Master Sterling, anxious to inspect the great house and his prized possessions, makes his way toward the forge through the receding waters. He expects to find Elias and Joshua already at work, stoking the fires to repair the damage the storm has wrought. Instead, he finds the heavy doors of the shop swinging aimlessly on their hinges, and the furnace, the heart of the estate, is cold and silent for the first time in 20 years. Sterling's eyes immediately go to the corner where the great cage stood as a monument to his power. He freezes. The morning light, streaming through the broken rafters, reveals a sight that defies his understanding of the world. 3 of the vertical bars he had watched Elias reinforce with double-thick iron over 20 years, have been missing. They haven't been sawed, and they haven't been bent. They have been shattered. Jagged, crystalline edges of iron remain at the base, showing the silver-white truth of the metal that had been thinned to the width of a fingernail. Sterling approaches the cage, his hands trembling as he touches the jagged remains.
He sees the flakes of black soot and tallow, the invisible groove filler, scattered on the floor like dead skin. In that moment, the reality of the deception crashes down on him. He realizes that every time he boasted about the cage's strength, every time he ran his hand over these solid bars, he was touching a lie. The man he called his best boy, the blacksmith he trusted above all others, had spent 7,300 days planning his downfall right in front of his eyes. There is no trace of Elias or Joshua, no tools left behind, no farewell messages. The forge is an empty shell, stripped of its purpose and its spirit. Sterling looks at the anvil and sees a small, triangular file resting on its surface, the only item left in the center of the room. It is a final, the silent insult from the master who used the master's own environment to carve a path to freedom. The masterpiece was never the cage, it was the 20-year-long performance of a man who knew that the only iron that cannot be broken is the iron of the human will. The legend of Elias did not end with the shattered bars of the forge. It began the moment he vanished into the hurricane's gray veil. For decades after the storm of 1857, whispered stories circulated through the slave quarters of the neighboring counties about the patient warrior who had outlasted the iron. They spoke of a man who could hear the language of the clouds and a boy who learned to hide the truth in the palm of his hand. The great cage remained on the Sterling estate, a rusted and hollowed-out reminder that no amount of reinforced metal can contain a spirit that has decided it is already free. Elias and Joshua were never recaptured. Some accounts say they reached the Ohio River using the same acoustic masking they perfected in the forge to move silently through the night. Others believe Elias eventually found the sons he had lost to the auction block, recognized by the same rhythmic strength in their hands that had once swung the master's sledgehammer. Regardless of where the road took them, Elias left behind a new kind of resistance, one that proved that victory does not always require a sudden explosion, but can be won through the slow, microscopic persistence of a triangular file. This story serves as a chilling reminder that the past is never truly buried. It is etched into the very materials we use to build our world. The maker of sorrows transformed himself into the architect of hope by understanding that even the strongest system has a frequency, a heartbeat, and a breaking point. He turned the master's arrogance into a weapon and the sky's fury into a shield, proving that the long game is often the deadliest game of all. As we look back at the dark ancient history of the plantation era, we must remember the men like Elias who worked in the shadows. Their masterpiece wasn't the iron they bent, but the silence they broke, and the legacies of endurance they left for those brave enough to look beneath the surface. The snap of the iron in 1857 still echoes today for anyone who feels the weight of a cage and waits for the first roll of thunder to make their move. Until next time, remember that the iron may be cold, but the fire of a patient man never truly goes out.